everyone, I'm Ken from Ion Radio, and with me is Ed, the creator of the robot AI on the episode we just watched. Ed, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you had an opportunity to see the battle report that I just completed using your robot. What did you think? I'm curious to get your impressions on how the robot got used.
Okay, well, looking through the episode, it looked okay. It looked pretty good. I mean, there were a couple of odd activations where Demo could have used some navigation at the beginning and ended up getting some concentrate fire instead. But hey, that's life. That's the dice. And but overall, there was nothing outrageously horrible. There was one moment where the Gazanti two turns in a row got a squadron command, and I was wondering, that's not great. But it ended up okay because they managed to kill Corin, which was the squadron objective. They were going to be going after the nastiest fighters because they're not bombers, they're anti-fighter squadrons. So that worked out okay. And maybe the only thing is maybe Jerry out the gate should have been accelerating and leading a little bit more, because as a second player, he could have been moving his nose further over into the turning assault frigates to catch them when they'd finished their move. But that was the only thing.
So I was looking at a lot of different things with the robot rules and how it wanted to stay. And sometimes I got some really corny activation suggestions. For example, no squadrons and the Gazanti wants to squadron. So I would just go to the next die roll, pick a navigate, for example. And I think what I was trying to do was stay within the spirit of the robot. So if we wanted to keep something in the front arc, all right, can Jerry really get it to move in such a way where it would properly sit? Speed was one of those things where it became do I want to stay in the long range, like for example with the Star Destroyer, or with the Gazanti it wanted to stay within range 3 of the ISD, because that was the ship it was escorting. So it's trying to do all of that, and there's probably one or two times looking back at the game I could have changed things a little bit.
Sure, it's always easy. I mean, it's easy for me to watch it and go afterwards, oh, that would have been better. I mean, it's hindsight and backseat driving is really easy. But no, I think it went well. I mean, the ships were really circling around one another, and they weren't just sort of flying off into corners and doing stupid stuff. So I mean, the targeting the flagship and keeping it in their preferred arcs, which is what they're supposed to do.
So now that we've actually got to see a whole battle report on the channel, and it wasn't fully filmed. I mean, we showed this in more or less photographs, just the amount of back and forth I had to do to try and get this on a recording. It was a fascinating exercise for me just in the production component of it. You also played with this fleet at home. And a different objective, that's okay. And then I also played it a second time. So I want to go through, just for everyone curious to see, all right, was this a one-off that Ken actually won? Or, what happens when we've got other people playing the robot? Could you tell me about the experience you had when you piloted the robot with my fleet?
Sure. So I flew the Rebels, again, against the same fleet. So same ships flying. Chose the advanced gunnery. And I thought I'd lost. I played through right till the end to round 6. And there was quite a lot of carnage at round 6. It was a real final show. And I thought I'd lost. And when I tallied up the points, I just squeezed by with a 16-point margin of victory. So it was very close, right up to, it was a nail biter, right up to the end.
In other words, the fleet matchup does seem like the robot, or my fleet rather, would win. And oddly enough, I flew the exact same configuration a second time. I did this off film. And what I wound up finding out, I changed my tactics just a little bit for the same objective, and I went for victory points. That ISD and Jerjerrod came into more effect in my second playthrough, and it almost tabled me, and I wound up losing against the robot. I think it was by 315 points or something like that. So it was a stellar win for the robot.
I was going to say, well, that's sort of one big win, a slight win, and a loss, which is about average for what I've seen the performance. I've played a lot of games against the robot, obviously, and I seem to win 2/3 of them, one by a good margin, one by a squeak, and 1/3 of them I lose.
That seems to, with a very limited set here, exactly what winds up happening in virtually the same game with the same 3 fleets.
Yep. Yeah, it's that stands up because I must have played over 100 games with the robot now. After, I've played a couple of Rebellion in the Rim campaigns, and that's when I really looked at sort of the overall performance, because I was actually recording things and keeping a track of the battles, because you got to do that, and that's where I saw that these seem to be the ratios: big win, slight win, and then loss.
So we actually got an opportunity during the pandemic to play a Rebellion in the Rim campaign together, where you did everything yourself. You had the robot I think you used the robot for my fleets, if I remember correctly.
Yep, that's right.
And I wound up being the Grand Admiral, saying where my bases would be. You were the opposing Grand Admiral. Now, that was a lot of fun for me. You had the opportunity to play all of it. What was your experience now on that, having a little bit of human interaction?
Oh, it was great. Because when you play Rebellion in the Rim, there isn't a lot of secret information. The only real secret information is what the objectives are on the bases. And that's about it. That's why I never did anything for the Corellian conflict, because there's too much secret information. And so Rebellion, not much that secret. You know where the rebels are. You just don't know what they're waiting for with their bases. And so, but having someone say, "What do I want to do with my fleet?" That was a really big input, because playing solo, if you play Rebellion in the Rim solo, I put guidelines to say, where is the robot going to attack? You can just decide, or I put some tables in there for someone who really doesn't want to decide and just wants to roll it off. So there is an element of, whatever, the robot's going to live his own life, but it is more pleasant playing with a human being. And that's, for me, that's kind of the leitmotif of the robot. I didn't make it to replace people, because you can't replace people. And you'll never have as much fun as when you play with somebody else. It'll never be as fun or as exciting as playing with somebody else. So the robot's really when you can't play with anybody else, or when you want to practice, or that's really the spirit with which I made it. So having a Grand Admiral for Rebellion in the Rim campaign was really good, just for the choices of attacks and the upgrades and making the fleets grow. Because again, and that's something, as far as growing the fleets, I didn't put any guidelines for how the fleet should grow, because if not, it just gets too complicated. There's just too much stuff.
Well, it seemed to work out fairly well in terms of the Rebellion in the Rim campaign that we played. You won that one. And we were going to start another one, as I recall, and that's right around the time that the 1.5 rules dropped. So we'll have to get back to another campaign at some point, Ed, just because I had such a blast doing that. And I think we were going to change where your fleets get to be the robot, and then I get to control the game.
Yeah, switch over. And I played another campaign that completely solo, very small one, where I actually alternated, where it was I rolled off to see which would be the robot fleet. So basically played both Grand Admirals.
Interesting.
Which was fun too. Different way to do it. And that way I never really knew what fleet I was going to be playing. That was that was an interesting way to do it.
So let's talk about the robot in particular. And I'm really curious to kind of get to the meat of what was the inspiration for doing the robot? And we'll start there, because I've got a bunch of questions. But let's see, what made you come up with it?
Okay, well, I ended up at a time where I couldn't join my gaming group, because we were meeting up on Thursday evenings and I just couldn't make it. And I ended up playing a lot of Armada on my own. And it's sort of like playing chess against yourself. It's fun up to a point. And so I started to want to have something a little bit, less predictable. So I started doing scripting for saying, well, how would what would a ship do, so that I wouldn't have to pre-decide all the commands, all the orders for the ships. And then it got to thinking, well, how am I going to spend the defense tokens? And I got to thinking about more and more stuff. And it just got to the point where I figured, well, hell, I might as well share it. So I'd basically done it all in Excel. and a bunch of Excel tables. So I cleaned it up, and that's when I shared it. It's just because I used it for myself. I figured that someone else might like it.
Well, when it first came up, we saw it and got a kick out of it. That's why we started playing. And then that's part of the reason for this episode. So now I'm equally curious, because it's based on a D10. How did you kind of decide on the rule sets, or was that literally just trial and error?
Some trial and error. The D10 is because I'm lazy. And when you roll a D10, it's very easy to do percentage probabilities, because each slice of the D10 is a 10% chance.
Right.
So when you're going through, there's the 4 orders. So it's basically one of them is going to be 1 to 3, the other one 4 to 5, then 6, 7, 8, and 9 and 10, and you can slide it out however you want. So part of it, I could have done a D20 and had 5% slices instead, but that seemed a little bit too complicated. So, and a lot more swingy too, because the more you slice it up, the swingier it gets. So a D10 seemed to be a good way to keep things manageable, and not too many choices, because that way, I mean, you can't have more than 10 realistically. And so that was the D10. And then as far as the tables go, the idea was to have something that's going to follow best practices and not just be completely random, where it's flying off the edge of the table for no reason, or flying away from the enemy fleet, or doing stupid things. So I wanted to be kind of applying some best practices, including when you deploy. As written, the robot will tend to deploy small ships and squadrons before its big ones, so that it's going to be delaying placing the key pieces, which is the general best practice, but not always. Sometimes it'll do something unexpected. That's why it's 70% of the time it'll just follow the script, and 30% of the time it'll do something where you don't know, you just got to roll it. So I felt that 70-30 balance was it works for me, at least. I mean, you can change it, because just about all of the tables start with roll a d7 and pick the first choice. You could very easily say, if you want more randomness, roll a d10, and 1 to 5 is go down the table, and 6 to 10 is roll randomly. So you can change that probability structure really easily. Probabilistic, but I mean, it follows. It does have a script and some, as I said, some kind of best practices.
So one of the things that I really enjoyed about your robot was that you could kind of create like a template and change it a little bit for the ships. So like, do they want to be at long range or medium or short range, as well as, forward facing, broadsiding, and everything else, to give each ship its own unique profile. And some of the ships can kind of go into multiple different categories. And if memory serves, you have 4 different types of like command structures, we'll call them, where depending on what they are. I'd love to hear more about the creative process behind that, and what made you kind of decide to develop that, and what gave you the idea to run across those types of templates.
Okay, well I figured that's because deciding to do the ship characteristics, which are the range, the movement profile, and the command profile, is basically what lets you control the ships independently, because the whole idea is that they're going to fly towards their target, into their preferred range, use their movement profile, and then follow their orders. So having those things is what lets you control the ships without having to make all of the decisions, basically. And going into those different sides, basically just playing the game. You've got an ISD. It's forward facer, wants to keep its nose pointed at the enemy all the time. It's pretty much a no-brainer. You take an MC-80. It's a broadsider. So it's going to try and fly within range, turn its broadside, and circle around the enemy. That's what they do. And some ships are more varied. Sometimes they want to be forward facers. Sometimes they want a broadside. And when you look at the different ships in the game, you've got your big heavy bruisers, but you also have some that want to skirt around the danger, like CR90s or even gladiators. I mean, if you throw a gladiator into the meat grinder, it's not going to live.
True.
It's often a good idea to sneak around and then do your broadside and follow up. So that was basically the idea. I mean, here I've got the card in front of me. I mean, you got a forward facer and broadsider, the flanker, who's going to try and sneak around, the escorter. I mean, that's going to be your Gazantes and your GR-75 transports. And finally, the runner, the one that's going to run away. and all ships become runners once they're too damaged to be viable.
Right.
So the idea is once they're complete, limping on one health point, they're going to disengage and run away.
Right.
And it also lets you lifeboat an admiral, because you can put you can put Sato on a torpedo frigate and fly him around the side of the board. He'll just stay away from everybody, for example. So that was the rationale behind that. The different ships are just going to fly differently with regards to their target. And on the command types, there's the vanilla, which does a bit of everything, which is kind of the standard, and that can generate some weird choices sometimes, because some ships don't want to do squadron ever. Right. So if they can end up squadroning, it's kind of bizarre. But if not, other than that, I mean, you've got your carrier prototype who wants to be activating as many squadrons as possible. So on a carrier type, well, chances are you've got a very high chance of rolling a squadron order for them. Then you've got the mover who is all about moving, all about getting in position. And again, navigation is kind of the default order in Armada, as far as I'm concerned. If you don't know what to do, when in doubt, navigate. Because I mean, there's no point concentrating fire if you're facing the wrong way and all your guns are pointing in the wrong direction. So getting the dangerous part pointed at the enemy is probably the best strategy. So when in doubt, nav. That's why the attacker profile is going to navigate a lot, but also do some concentrate fire. And I hesitated when I was developing it to say maybe I need a command profile for the later part of the game, sort of as of 4, 5, 6. Because engineering is a bit more prevalent in those turns. And you don't do a lot of engineering with the robot. He's pretty aggressive, and he'll fly towards his enemy and get into preferred range and then attack as much as possible. And the default activation is first attack. No, you activate the best attack. You don't activate the most threatened ship. So he's by default pretty aggressive. So that was just the thinking about it. But I didn't do the special turn 4, 5, 6 because I figured there was already enough to think about.
There is a lot in there. It's kind of almost looks at the entire game holistically, as opposed to, all right, here's my ship is going to do X or Y or Z. This one really kind of makes the robot think a little bit, and it provides the player, at least in my experience, that opportunity where it's like, okay, this makes sense that it's going to come in and I want to plan to go around it and try and avoid its main fire arc. But every once in a while, the ship's just going to kind of completely go off to the side for an unknown reason, stays in its profile. Maybe it doesn't get a shot. And sometimes it works out for the robot. And in my experience, sometimes demo comes around and blows one of my assault frigates up. But that's what happened in my second game.
And it sometimes works out. I mean, again, it's random. I mean, you're rolling a dice, so sometimes it's going to be perfect, and sometimes it's just going to be so bizarre you're wondering what the hell it's doing. So, and when I play, if it does something suicidal, I think, okay. I mean, it's just a dice. The object is to play a game and have some fun. Right. It's not to beat. I mean, if you want to beat the robot, you'll beat it every time.
Right.
Okay, because you know what it's aiming for. You know the target ship. All you need to do is take whatever target it's going for and fly him away and lead him into a trap or a kill box and just murder him. So, I mean, defeating the robot is not difficult, but if you're actually, really playing the game and trying to challenge yourself, then yeah, sometimes it can be really mean. Yeah, I was just saying, it's like the defense tokens. I mean, if you want to burn out the robot's defense tokens in turn 2, you can. You just spend them uselessly. You don't think about it. But that's why I tried to write in some basic guidelines. And again, they're not rules, they're guidelines. That's the whole point of using that word. It's advice on how to use the robot. It's not, you must do it this way. It's about, this is perhaps the right way to do it, but it's up to you. I mean, the game has so many moving parts, and it's very varied that it's really difficult to say you must always do that. But for example, a brace token, you're very rarely ever going to brace 2 damage, unless you're so badly damaged that you're going to die if you don't. So that's one of the things that's written in. So, but you could, if you're playing against a Leia fleet, and there's a whole bunch of CR90s with TRCs, and you're chipping away sort of 3 damage, 3, 4 damage, then you're going to burn through the tokens pretty quickly. But you would also burn through some normal human player's tokens pretty quickly doing that too. So it's a give and take. It's about having fun and playing the game.
I have so far, well, I mean, that's, again, like you said, it's all about having fun. It's about enjoying the game of Armada when you really don't have another human player to really interact with. So now you originally had written the robot under the 1.0 rules, and then we had the 1.5 change, which added the need to have command tokens, and then you got a whole bunch of new commanders with Clone Wars. What did you wind up doing in terms of reviewing what you had with the robot and then moving it into a slightly different mindset? Because 1.5 is a different version of the game. And then include the Clone Wars, because I know you haven't gotten the latest wave. That's, I'm sure, coming up soon. But I'd love to hear how you came up with the decisions to move to 1.5 in Clone Wars.
Okay, well, moving towards that was I had to, because I mean that's the new stuff, and I wanted to play with it anyways. Yeah, I updated to 1.5, and the robot is in its 1.5 version now, because I skipped a couple of versions just to sink in with the so that the robot had the same version name, the versioning number as the actual game. So right now there's the characteristics for the Acclamator, the Munificent, the Hard Cell, and the Charger, Consular, and the Admirals that come in the base sets. But I have not yet included the what are they called? The Venator, the Recusant, the Providence, and the Pelta.
The Pelta, yeah.
So and the Admirals that go with them. And especially, I still need to play a little bit. I haven't been able to play as much as I'd want to these past few weeks, but I still need to play test things, because some of the ships are a little bit weird. And I find the Munificence is pretty straightforward. I mean, you just keep the front pointed at the bad guy and keep on going. But I find that the Providence, it kind of flies like an enormous demolisher. It's a bit weird. It's it's a big ship, but it works best at short range, but it can't sustain that very long or navigate well enough to stay there very long. So it kind of does these big flybys. So it's I have to test it a little bit more, just to give some suggestions on profile and command type. And I need to play with the admirals a bit more too. There's a few of them that still have me a little bit hesitant. Yularen, I don't know how to play Yularen yet. I haven't figured him out. I've tried a couple of games with him, and he just gets uselessly murdered. So I don't know does Yularen suck? Maybe, or maybe I don't know how to play him yet. And also Trench. Trench is a bit of a mystery for me. Other than piling up some hard cells with the parts resupply and just spamming out engineering and keeping everyone alive longer than they should be, I don't really see how you can play Trench. So maybe that's how you do it nowadays. But so I haven't quite figured them out yet well enough to be able to give some sort of basic guidelines on what to do with them.
Well, I know even for us, we're still experimenting with all of the latest wave ships. John's, he's going to find a Grievous list eventually as a prime example, but that one's been difficult for him, although there's an upcoming episode where I think I've got Grievous that might have some clue on that. Trench is one I'm really looking forward myself to working through. But that's one of the nice things about Armada, is that we have this plethora of commanders and options to really play the game, and everyone's style is going to be a little different, and I'm sure it's going to help feed into the development of your robot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many options. There's so much stuff to do. I mean, the robot doesn't cover any of the upgrades on ships, because again, I figure there's already enough in there. I mean, there's like 42 pages, so I mean, you don't have to read all 42, because there's the objectives in there too. But I mean, I figured there's enough. And there's the cards that there's the sort of the fast reference cards, and basic idea is I don't want to add in any cards, because there's already the 4 or 5 basic cards you need to be able to play fast, and I don't want to make it more than that. So that's why, I mean, when do you use a TRC? It's when you have an active token and it makes sense. So just for example, I mean, the toughest ones where I really had to struggle with the choice not to do it was with the interdictor. On gravity root circuits, for example, what do you do with your gravity root circuits? Because that can be very, very specific. But I figured, no, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of giving guidelines for every individual upgrade card. I'll go crazy, and it's just too much. So it's just, do your best. Do your best with the upgrades on the ships. And just to get back to your the second part of your question for updating the robot to 1.5, well, it was basically just going through it. What did they change and what does it mean? The biggest change was the evade token, because I mean that is one of the big changes. and just adding in some priority on using the evade token at short and medium range, and targeting it as well. Because basically in the previous robot, an evade token at short range was just ignored.
Yeah.
It never came up, and it was a very, very low priority at medium as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a question of basically looking at that token. And what else was there? I've got it here. What did I put in the 1.5? Yeah, updated. Yeah, readying the upgrades. But again, I mean, I just included a note to say, there's lots of tokens flying around. Remember to save them to ready the upgrades. And it doesn't really go beyond that. So I mean, that's just advice. It's not really. Yeah, I added some options on deployment, because the basic robot, you basically always deployed distance 3 and speed 2.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, how do you angle the ship with regards to the human fleet? And I added in a little bit of randomness to make them deploy sometimes shorter and at different speeds.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not quite as predictable in their deployment in first round activations.
I opted in my game not to adjust the speeds. I kept everything at speed 2. I thought about doing do we come in slow or fast? And I said, you know what, let's just focus on the basic premise of the robot to begin with. And then, get everyone to see it. I'm actually very curious to see what some of our subscribers think about the robot, and whether they've tried it as well, and what their experiences are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious too. I mean, looking at the file page on Board Game Geek, it's been the current version's been downloaded by about 240 people, and the previous ones are about 240, 350. But I have no idea how many people did the first version and have been following it through, or just did the first version and stopped there. So I actually have no idea how many people play with the robot. So it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to find out. I just know how many downloads it's gotten. I mean, chances are, there's some people that probably download it, see the size of it, and say, "I'm not reading that," and just pack it up.
I remember the first time I looked at it, it was, about 30 pages or so. And my initial thought was, good God, how detailed is this? But like you've already mentioned, it was about halfway through, 12 pages in. It's like, oh, you've got something for every single objective that's been released. And then there's, an entire section on each commander as well. And then initially you had had a separate booklet for Rebellion in the Rim. And I noticed all that got added in together. And that's a whole nother 15 pages or so just on how the robot would work within Rebellion in the Rim. So when you really look at how big that robot is, yes, it's a 40, 50 page booklet, but you really only need about 10 pages of it. And as you mentioned, those reference cards, they were on the table the entire time that I was playing, just because at the end of the day, to be able to quick look at what was the defense order token that the robot would prefer to use.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, it fits on the cards, and that's why I don't want to do any new cards, because I figured there's enough. And yeah, it's the beginning that's the meat and bones. But yeah, again, that was a choice. I wanted to make it so you could play the robot and actually play the game, and not just do death matches on it, so that you could. Because that's fun, but once you've done 2 or 3, it's like, the whole part of Armada, one of the whole points is the strategic aspect of it, and choosing the missions and playing the missions and playing the objective. And so I wanted to include that too. So that's why there's the guidelines for each individual objective, which does add a lot of pages into it. There's a lot of objectives. Over half of Rebellion in the Rim is about those new objectives. Yeah, just to try and make it sort of a complete experience, so that you feel like I don't know if I succeeded, but the object was to make it feel as if you're playing Armada.
No, and not in the case like you mentioned when you first were talking about how you came up with it. You don't want to be playing yourself. What I liked about the robot, and this is a very specific thing that I really enjoyed about it, you're going to try and play the game as well as you can, but sometimes there are choices you have to make. And when you start saying, well, would I do this or would I do that, the robot can almost eliminate that choice to say, do that. and then okay, and then that's, I think, where the robot really shines, is when it does have 2 or 3 good options, and the roll of the die based on the characteristics of the ship or the objective it's playing, and then the robot decides to make that move. So for me, it was a lot of fun to really do that. And in this case, the game you developed, the Moff Jerjerrod fleet, and I put together the Cursed Agate fleet. So there was some human involvement in it, and then you also selected the profiles for this battle. And at the end of the day, I think it wound up working out really well. And I know you had fun playing against the robot, on your time. And then now that you've seen it in play, I'm sure you kind of enjoyed seeing the robot actually on film, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Well, what's fascinating for me is to actually see somebody else using it. Because I mean, I've obviously played with the robot a lot because it played a few games with it, but seeing somebody else use it is quite fascinating too. It's very interesting to see. Well, does it work? Does it work as it was intended to, basically?
And then I guess based on, like we've already talked about, with 1 or 2 exceptions on how Jerjerrod could have used, I'm hoping I used the robot as it was intended.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of odd orders that came out, but hey, that's the dice. I mean, it's the especially on the Gazanti, which is vanilla, which has the vanilla command option, which it's going to roll a little bit of everything. So I mean, everything includes the squadrons when it wouldn't necessarily need them, but what the hell, it's that's life. Again, Armada is a difficult game, and we make mistakes when we play. So one of the ideas is if a mistake isn't completely idiotic or suicidal, then the player made a mistake. I mean, we all make mistakes when we play. If we don't quite have the right order at the right time, we thought we wanted to nav when we actually really needed that that engineering, and that's the way it goes. Especially on the high command ships. I mean, it was easier maybe on the ISD because we gave it the mover profile.
Yes,
and
we
mover,
did.
He moves. He either moves or he engineers. He's not going to squadron. He's not going to concentrate. So it makes him very much about getting his face into the enemy and then unloading as many dice as possible.
And he really had 1 or 2 good opportunities at the end of that game. My 2 assault frigates were hurting. The one in particular, I think if I would have chosen to go second as opposed to first, and the exact same layout occurred, Demo would have taken out at least one of my assault frigates, and I think that other one would have been in trouble too. So from my experience, again, just the little things that robot did, it was just fun for me to see an imaginary opponent of sorts in this robot to really actually provide a little bit of a challenge. And there were times where I'm thinking this robot's going to get all the objective tokens. It got 5 of them. And honestly, it just came down to I was able to run and outpace the ISD, and that's the only reason I think I won in this game.
Yeah, getting the tokens is good. That means you played the robot properly because that's one of his objectives. I mean, because it's dangerous territory.
Right.
He's going to prioritize getting those tokens, and the way the guidelines on deployment are going to encourage the objectives being grouped together as well. So, and you're going to deploy the fleet in front of the objective so it can go get them as well. So I mean, everything the guidelines encourage the robot to have his tokens within reach and go get them as fast as possible. So it's there's actually a good example of sort of the objective play that the robot will do.
Yeah, and actually that was one of the things I think part of the reason I wanted to choose that objective. First of all, the other 2 were probably not good for me. And the flip side to that was also I was curious, how well is the robot really going to do with these objective tokens? And it really, like I said, it picked all of them up. And the second game that I played off camera, guys, sorry, but I was dead. And I don't even think that game left turn 4. I'm pretty sure I was virtually tabled at the end of turn 3 with just salvation left. Some of it attack dice, because
sometimes when the dice hate you, they hate you, and when they love you, they love you. And if the robot's rolling nothing but doubles and you're rolling nothing but blanks, then it's going to kill you.
So the second game off camera, the red dice that were being rolled were pretty much identical to what I do to John in a normal battle report. I'm going to force the re-roll of a red double, and it just shows up another red double. And I intentionally tried to remove myself from this. I was using a dice tower and everything else just to, so that there was no possible way that I was potentially manipulating the dice. The red dice just did not like me in that second game. So I have to say, I know how John normally feels with his defensives.
That's right, the red dice love you usually.
They usually do. Off camera, there's a lot of looks I get from John when I re-roll back into doubles, but that's a story for a different time. Was there anything that you wanted to kind of express to everyone that might be interested in playing with your robot, or that has, or just in general? This is your opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, not really. I mean, I don't have any wild philosophy. It's just, have some fun, play the game. I mean, it's especially with, this is a bit topical, but with the last announcement we got out of AMG, I mean, it's up to us, the community and the gamers, to keep this game alive. So let's play it and keep it alive in any way we can. It's a great game, and it deserves to be played.
It really does. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. If I didn't, then I wouldn't have this channel. Again, I really appreciate a couple things. Ed, first, letting me use the robot on the channel. That a big thank you to allow us to film this, and it means a lot to us.
Okay, you snagged it at the end, but well, all I can say is, well, thank you. I mean, it's great. I've really enjoyed the different exchanges we've had. I really enjoy your channel. I mean,
thank you very much.
I think I must have been in like the first 20 subscribers, because I remember when you first came in. And you guys consistently, nearly every Friday, put out content, and it's good content. It's well filmed. It's great stuff. I mean, you guys are on the ball. So it's a real pleasure to be able to contribute and sort of, in a way, give back. Because I can appreciate how much time it takes to do all that, and it's creating content, creating battle reports, and doing it as well as you guys do. It doesn't happen in 5 minutes. It's a real effort. And I think it's great. I mean, it's thanks to guys like you and John, and stations like Ion Radio that keep the game alive. And that's really, really important, especially now. It couldn't be more important than now.
Well, thank you very much. And I know I appreciate that. I'm speaking for John, but I'm sure he would mimic my statements as well. You are right. It is a little bit of effort on our end. What you guys see in 1 hour, and I think John addressed this in one of his backseat admirals, but that's usually 3 to 4 hours of film time, editing, and everything else. So there is a lot that we put into it, but hey, we enjoy the game, and we do this, for you guys. This initially was supposed to be, we'll throw something out once a month, but the dice didn't roll that way for us, and here we are almost 2 years later. So Ed, thank you so much for joining me today, and being part of the channel, letting us use your robot. Look forward to probably doing another campaign with you at some point. Maybe we could do Clone Wars for fun.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And then for everyone else that's watching, Ed's Robot, you can download it. The links are below. It's all on Board Game Geek. Great thing to check out. So please do. And until next time, I'm Ken. And I'm Ed. And this has been Ion Radio.